Anterior pelvic tilts have got a bad rap over the past few years, and a lot of people tend to fear this lordotic position. But what's interesting is when you look at high-level athletes, a lot of them tend to operate from this anterior pelvic tilt. So why has an anterior pelvic tilt got a bad name? And what is it that you can do about it? Well, in this video, we're going to go over exactly that, some of the benefits to having an anterior pelvic tilt, and how you can smoothly integrate that into your body. An anterior pelvic tilt is typically a byproduct of what is known as lower cross syndrome. Now, to make this as simple as possible, what this means is I have overactive hip flexors, I'd say slash quads, alongside my lower erectors. And then my glutes alongside my lower abdominals tend to be a little bit weaker. Now, there's certainly a lot more that goes into an anterior pelvic tilt, but without getting too much into the weeds, we're gonna leave the explanation to that for today. Now, I would say that a lot of people tend to have weak glutes and lower abdominals, but something that does concern me is what people find themselves doing the most throughout the day and how they actually do that. And that thing is sitting. It's very rare that you will see someone actually sitting on their sit bones when they are in a seated position. Chances are that they are actually going to be more in this slouched or rounded position, which is actually putting them more into a posterior tilt. Now, this posterior tilt certainly isn't active because our glutes are going to be dormant while we're seated, and chances are our lower abdominals aren't going to be integrated into that. But something is going to have to support us in that position. And the issue is now when we stand up and we're no longer sitting, our body is going to have to create some level of counterbalance. And this counterbalance comes from our backside, where our body is innately going to try to find balance. And what ends up happening is because our hip flexors and our quads shorten, the lower erectors will tend to overcompensate when we come up on 2 feet. Now, this in of itself might create an anterior tilt in a standing position. But what I'm more concerned about is what happens when I go to posteriorly shift or hinge my hips back. Do I actually maintain that position, or do I just fold right back into a rounded lumbar position? If you're a desk jockey and you perform a hinge, chances are you are going to go back into a posteriorly tilted position and not maintain an anterior tilt. So what we're looking for here is the sweet spot between having a neutral pelvis, which is about 4 to 10 degrees of an anterior tilt, but also having a well-functioning anterior tilt. Meaning that when I go through movement or exercise, that I can actually use these muscles on the posterior chain properly. Because what ends up happening if I'm sitting for an extended period of time and I'm creating all this excess of tightness on the front side, on the back side of my body, I actually end up losing quite a bit of activation. An activation that is very important for me when I go about my day-to-day movement. So now that we have some of the theory out of the way, let's get into some of the exercises that is actually going to contribute to a more neutral pelvic position. So for our first technique, we're going to be working through a release right around our hips. Whether I'm in an anterior or overly posteriorly tilted position, one area that tends to get quite restricted on a lot of people is this anterior side of the IT band. And when we can start to open that up, chances are we're going to be able to manipulate the pelvis a little bit easier. So grab yourself a soft ball. You can also use a hard ball or a lacrosse ball for this. And what you're going to do is locate the seam in your shorts or in your pants. You're going to go right on that, and you're going to take about a quarter roll just on top of it. So I'm kind of more on the anterior side of my leg. Once I'm here, all I'm going to do is come down onto that. I'm going to take my front leg in front. And all I want you to do is do slight micro motions going back and forth this way. Slipped out a little bit. So I'm just going to do slow kind of micro motions going back and forth. And you can just gently walk down your leg as you're doing this. And you're going to find different points in here that will tend to be a little bit more sensitive than others. And what I would encourage you to do is spend about 90 seconds on each point. So not 90 seconds per leg, but 90 seconds per point. And that's going to allow for an adequate release to happen in through that area, as well as we're going to bring new hydration and circulation into that point. So the area that I'm going to be targeting roughly is kind of from this point in my hip, right up top here, and I can go right to the top of my knee. So there's kind of this imaginary line that I can follow. So one leg here might take you upwards of, let's say, 10 minutes to work on, depending on the amount of points that you have. Once you have released all of that, like I said, we're gonna have more circulation in through there, and we can get into our next exercise where we're gonna start to bring some proper tension into our hamstrings. So this next technique is called hamstring hinges. So what we're gonna start to do here is create some length into our hamstrings, as well as just get the hamstrings and the glutes to function a little bit better. Because what ends up happening for people who have an excess of anterior tilt or have a lack of proper tension in their hamstrings is the pelvis just kind of tends to go all over the place. It might be excessively anteriorly tilted in a standing position, but when I start to hinge, like I was saying earlier, the hips might tend to fold over. So we're going to start to work on just a basic hinge pattern. So what I'm going to get you to do is take your palms, just the heel of your hand here, and you're going to take it right onto your hip bones. So I'll give you a side view here so you can see my lower back. So my hands are here, and all I'm going to get you to do is go from the standing position, and I'm just going to get you to hinge your hips back this way. And immediately, as soon as I get to about this point here, I can feel my hamstrings get quite a bit of a tug. I'm trying to bring a little bit of awareness into my glutes there as well. And then all I'm going to do is just stand back up around that. Hands will stay on the hips, and I'm just going to shift back. Now, what we're going to be mindful of here is that posterior tilt wanting to get created through the lower back. So if my hamstrings aren't functioning well, then what might happen is I might start to fold under. And what does this look like? Looks like I'm sitting down, right? Might look a little bit familiar. So what we're going to do is just make sure that we're sitting back. My upper body is pretty much parallel with the ground, and then I'm going to use that hamstring tension just to stand myself back up with. All I'm going to work through here is going for about 10 to 12 repetitions, and we're just getting the hamstrings just primed here. This is a really great way to get your hamstrings active, hydrated, and just ready for any type of exercise that you might have ahead. I use that before just about every exercise routine that I go into, just as a way to kind of prime my hamstrings, get my hips, and get everything working in synchronicity with one another. Now for the third technique, it is more of a lifestyle tip than it is an actual exercise, and that is to just try to sit on your sit bones when you are sitting. That is a whole lot of sit. So what you are going to aim to do is make sure that your lower back is staying neutral when you are in a seated position. And what this is going to allow for is your body to not go into a overcompensation from a seated position, so that when you stand up, your body doesn't have to try to create this excess of counterbalance. So really all you have to do here is more or less just kind of feel out your lower back when you are seated, and just see if you can almost feel your vertebrae in through there, or if you can visually see that you're in this slouched position. Because if you can feel that you're in this rounded position or feel your vertebrae protruding out, then chances are you are in a excessive posterior tilt. So just aim to sit on your sit bones, and that would be a great lifestyle tip that you can integrate right now. So when it comes to addressing an anterior tilt, remember that not all of them are equal. It's not as easy as just saying that I need to just posteriorly tilt my pelvis and focus on strengthening a couple different muscle groups. There's typically a lot more that goes into that, and we need to think about creating balance not only in those areas, but really throughout our entire body. Now, if there's anything you can take away from this video, is to remember that just because you have an anterior pelvic tilt in a standing position doesn't mean that you have one when you're actually in motion, and when you should actually have one, such as through a hinge position. So practice your anterior tilts. Remember, 4 to 10 degrees, that's what you're aiming for. And you may just find that you can start moving like your favorite athlete. So don't go crazy with the anterior tilts, and certainly don't go crazy with the posterior tilts. Remember, what we're looking for is a harmony, or the sweet spot between those two systems, just like everything in life. If you like this video, throw it a like. You can also subscribe to the channel for more content similar to this in the future. And until next time, make sure you are prioritizing and then you are optimizing for you. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.